I Was a Killing Joke, 2012, Jodi C. King. Chapter 4, Get Me Out of Here. Wanting things you want too much, chasing ends you take too much. Things will be right. As soon as the night hits the streets and it hits the freaks, she will be cleaner, there will be more, for there will be less. She will have more room. CEC. Teen. The following year we went on a bit of a fanatical escapade, chasing Killing Joke live at Manchester and Nottingham, Burton-on-Trent, Newcastle and the Reading Rock Festival. We missed the show due to the fact that the band cut 2 songs out of the set and arrived an hour late following a white-knuckle ride to Sheffield in a friend's car. An attempt to make up for a second gig in Nottingham, which had been cancelled. The reason for the cancellation, we heard, was that Jazz had broken his hand when he hit a glass-throwing knob the night before. The Newcastle gig was immense fun as we went down in a pack, driven in a large blue transit van by a fellow member of CPSC, Crumpsall Pervy Scooter Club. The transit had been a great asset on many occasions for scooter runs and gigs, although carrying a bunch of loonies in the back often caused much grief to the general public. Ed was incredibly fond of doing moonies in those days, as were most of the club, and on one occasion a few of them had bared their arses out of the rear window to the shock of an old couple in the car behind. The driver, Julian, had been pulled in for the offence as he was the owner of the van, and was ridiculously charged for indecent exposure, although there's no way you can stick your ass out of the back window of a transit while you're driving it. Killing Joke were on mentalist form in Newcastle that year, featuring a Jazz pretending to strangle himself with the microphone lead, and Jodi playing with his back to the audience, one foot on the drums, waggling his arse to the music. I much preferred Rock City in Nottingham as a venue, with its low stage and nightclub feel, as it suited the band much more than a seated concert hall. We'd travelled down to Nottingham with Jonesy and partner in their tiny, colourful old Citroen, which had both gear change stick and handbrake on the dashboard. They too found Killing Joke's magical connotations alluring, being that they had delved into and enjoyed Crowleyan ritual. They were also fans of Genesis Peorage, a mystical transgender type woman-bloke artist who once led a band called Psychic TV, who apparently practiced tantric sex magic and free love. Nottingham is a particularly beautiful city and one of the very few that I actually enjoy walking around, whether that be because Robin Hood left legend there, or it is just a place that didn't see so many people hanged. One has yet to learn. Following our arrival, our interested friends went off to enjoy the city. Whilst armed with a can of special brew each, Ed and I ventured into the parking grounds of Rock City. The Killing Joke tour bus was already there, and as the back doors of the club were open, we could hear that the sound system was being set up, and we wandered inside to have a nosy. Raven, who was relatively new to the band in Ed's eyes at that time, was stood inside looking towards the stage, wearing a long beige trench coat which was belted around the middle. "There's Raven," remarked Ed. "My God, what is he wearing?" We hovered around a while, edging further inside, at which point Raven noticed our attendance and casually walked over. He welcomed us with a friendly greeting and passed Ed a spliff, which Ed gladly accepted. I was teenage dumbstruck once again, but Ed, 5 years my senior, threw his usual questions of interest to Raven while he had the chance, eager to find out what was going on within the band behind the scenes. I listened as Raven informed us that he was adequately concerned at this time because some geezer had been going around the world impersonating him. Dressing and acting like the bass player, the imposter had even been signing autographs in his name. As he spoke to us, in that place of altered awareness caused by weed smoking all morning and nervous excitement, I began to wonder if it was Raven we were in the presence of, or in fact the imitator. From that moment on, I just couldn't take him seriously, though that could have been due to the rather new romantic-style ponytail he was sporting alongside that awful coat. He also looked a lot taller and slimmer than he did in the pictures or on TV. I still have a videotape of Raven and Jazz being interviewed by the late Paula Yates in the 80s music show The Tube. They put themselves across as a very cheeky duo indeed, giggling all the while, with Raven telling Paula they were laughing because she had got her nerve rash back. Having met the band myself many times since then, I can fully appreciate why she may have developed some kind of emotional, physical reaction in their company. The interview ended with Paula asking, "So why should everyone go and see Killing Joke then?" Jazz replied easily, with an air of conceit, finished off with a massive silly grin. "Because we are the most brilliant live band in the world." At that time, I'd probably only seen a dozen bands, but I was in agreement. The exclusivity of energy that I encountered with Killing Joke was so perfectly in tune with me, right down to my core, as was also the case for the most important person in my life. Ed would not mind me admitting that he was the most important, second only to Ralph, the black dog, who had recently been heaven sent to me for familiar and guardian duties. His name was chosen by my very special Aunt Thelma, who said his ears were too big, like those of the dog who played piano in the Muppets. Later we learned the meaning of Ralph is Council of Wolves or Famous Wolf. And sure enough, that dog lived up to his name. A bit of a runty Dumbo, I picked him up from the local dog's home. Ralph suffered with both distemper and parvovirus in the first few months of his life, surviving against all odds on love and healing to become such a well-travelled celebrity. People I had never even met would greet him by name on the street as we walked by. The Rock City gig that did go ahead that year was a so-called secret gig, producing a greater air of intrigue. It helped those fans lucky enough to get there feel like part of the elite and honoured few. Killing Joke would be performing their latest album, Brighter Than 1,000 Suns, which was breathtakingly spectacular at a decent venue live. Ed and I were at the doors to the club shortly after they opened, and we were met by a beefy rocker of a doorman dressed in denim. With his long hair tied back, a huge beard, and strictly devilish tattoos, he could have been perceived as one of Hell's keepers. He was blatantly getting off his head, openly displaying a huge bag of white powder, of which he was sniffing large amounts from a small penknife. He was keen to converse with us and asked us if we were the support band, Joy, before offering us both a snort of the powder, which we dubiously refused. With a small crowd, less pushing and shoving, and plenty of raised areas on which he could stand to observe, the gig was for me the best so far, and the atmosphere was one I could only describe as magical. The sheer sound of Jodi's guitar melted the air around us into a mystical cloud of truth essence, then and always. After the show, Jonesy and Co., plus a few other brave gatherers from Manchester, assembled in the Rock Club to drink ourselves into oblivion until throw-out time at 2 a.m. That night, in the multi-storey car park by Rock City, our bodies lined up in sleeping bags behind the Citroen, we attempted to sleep off the booze in the rapidly dropping nighttime temperature. Even intermittently comatose by an almost lethal amount of alcohol, it was still difficult to remain asleep. Either the cold or need for a pee would wake me every hour or so. Becoming increasingly dehydrated and having no water anywhere to rectify the situation, hanging on to the contents of the bladder felt like the only option to stay alive. At some point, however, I was unconscious long enough to enjoy a satisfying astral experience. I found myself on a moving train, looking for the amenities, which I would empty the bladder and satisfy the thirst. Suddenly, Jodi appeared with a huge jug of water in his hand. "Here, Claudine, open your mouth," were his words, and without further ado I gratefully received at least 1.5 liters of water, every drop savoured for its replenishing power. Chatting away with him, we laughed about many trivial things, yet concerned of my suffering, Jodi turned to a sink in the pale green painted compartment we were occupying, filled the jug back up and offered me more. I guzzled away, delighted and honoured at his kind treatment of me, a peasant, by he, a great musician and man, who was in my eyes an untouchable hero at that time. Waking up, I found myself in regular reality, still incredibly thirsty. So after taking a pee behind another overnight parked car, I had to make do with a swig of lager left over in a can from the night before. I couldn't shake off how real the dream experience with Jodi had felt, and I laughed to myself as I snuggled up beside Ed, in the belief that I was about to feel a little more comforted and warm as the northern hemisphere began to emerge from the darkest hour before the dawn. Next day we made our way into the centre of the city to meet the band for another signing at a record shop. There was a much longer queue forming at this place than there had been in Hanley, and it was Jodi and Big Paul doing the signing. I was wearing a leather bike jacket which I think I bought from Pikey, on which I had painted a picture of a little demonic-looking creature holding its mouth open whilst crouching down above the word "Ha." That, of course, is a 4-song EP the band brought out on Malicious Damage Records. Big Paul had drawn the picture in one of the fanzines, and so I was interested in what he might think of my version. As we got to the front of the queue, proudly bearing a crisp Kimsey mix of sanity for signing, Big Paul asked me to turn around as he had caught sight of the painting on my back and recognised it. I was chuffed to bits that he'd noticed it, and an extremely thrilled short fat teenager when he commented that it was an impressive copy of his creation. Later that year, Killing Joke headlined Friday night of the Weekend Rock Festival at Reading. Despite the fact that Ralph couldn't join us at the festival due to strict rules, Reading was an especially inviting opportunity. It was mushroom season, and so after gathering in rain, wind and occasionally sun on various grassy parts of Manchester and the Pennines, we headed down with enough to last us the whole weekend and some to spare besides. Hawkwind, headlining on the Sunday with an appearance from Lemmy, meant we only had one day of crap music sandwiched between the two very appealing nights of wonder. Besides the mushrooms, our travelling load consisted of a heavy pagoda tent, which had been given to me by father too. We had sleeping bags, a few food supplies, plenty of matches, skins and booze. Ed always had his safe bag, filled with insulin and energy drinks for emergencies, which he kept with him at all times, despite what states of intoxication he got in. The weather stayed fair for most of the day, and we carefully prepared trips for the approaching occasion, sitting on the ground outside the tent under a warm and sunny day. Many of our friends and acquaintances had turned up for the weekend, and with such an assortment of bands playing, there was something for everyone. However, most were there, in the main, for Killing Joke and Hawkwind. I had no interest in any of the other bands that were playing on the Friday, and so was happy to stay with the tent during the evening whilst others came and went. The tents were situated on a separate field, outside the enclosure, to which you entered through a turnstile on showing your wristband. There were some amazing stalls at that festival selling crafts, jewellery and clothing, so I had been for a quick browse early on during the quietest period. I never enjoyed the crowdedness of festivals, and so always stayed as far away from the central pits whenever possible. As the sky began to darken, Ed appeared and told us it was time. Time for the drop that would ensure our senses received maximum input during another live execution of Brighter Than 1,000 Suns. The only issue was, how many would we consume? We wanted a new experience, and up till then had been fairly careful about dosage, taking between 30 and 70, depending on size of mushroom and intensity of trip required. We had collected them in their hundreds for this event, and whether it was greed or inquisitiveness that spurred me that day, I decided to more than double my normal dose. Ed took the same amount. approximately 200 each, but he had a stronger stomach than me, plus was a good 3 stone heavier than I, so I should have realised that for me it was just over the top. Half an hour later, the sky darkening further still, we ventured into the enclosure as the band, playing before Killing Joke, were removing their instruments from the stage, the road crew moving quickly to get the next band on in their allocated time slot. My eldest sister Naomi, Claire, Ed, Pikey and I were all up at the front against the wooden boards, which kept the audience clear of the stage. In between the boards and the stage was a few feet gap where security kept a close watch on the drunken and disorderly folk, and cameramen frequented for ease of shots. It was already heaving and the mushrooms were kicking in good and fast. A bottle of piss was thrown towards the stage, which hit my sister on the head as we all held onto the barriers and tried to keep our place against the ever-pushing crowd of twats behind us. My stomach was turning, while the elation in my head was quite astounding, and I was picking up on the feelings of both excitement and annoyance from all around. The skies opened up, and a hard rain began to fall as Killing Joke arrived on the stage in an ever-intriguing mass of suspense and mystery. Flames shot up at either side of the stage, which was decorated with a huge red flag and backdrop, which seemed all the brighter to me and became a floating picture of pure ecstasy and pain all at once. To the collective delight of the fans that screamed and hailed in agreement, Coleman proclaimed into the microphone, "The gods are with us!" His face manic with involvement and meaning. Just as I began to fully appreciate the amazingness of the moment, the beer-fueled crowd started to push harder up towards the front, and another pint glass hit Jodi's guitar. He remained cool as ever and barely changed expression as a young man appeared, wiped down the guitar for him, and swiftly disappeared again. Everyone in the front rows of the audience was being crushed, and it was increasingly hard to breathe, let alone stand our ground. I elbowed frantically backwards, trying to rid myself of aggressors, and on borrowed strength, to the twinkly bright sound of chessboards, I pushed myself beyond my natural resources and passed out with my head against the barrier. Thankfully, one of the security had seen what had happened, and with the help of my pals, he hauled me over the barriers into the few feet of sanctuary that lay between the crowd and the stage. I came around a few moments later to find myself being dragged along in an upright position by a couple of bouncers. It was dark and I could not lift my head enough to see who had hold of me. Floppy and sick, I had overdosed on my chosen vehicle of enlightenment. I pleaded with the doormen to let me go back and watch the band, but they insisted that they took me to the first aid tent. There they dumped me in a corner, presented me with a large black bin bag, and promptly returned to their duties. With my head inside the bag, which appeared 3 times larger than any other black bag I have ever encountered, I was able to dispel the poisoning dose of mushrooms, each one lighting up in a cartoon purple and pink, waving goodbye to me as it went. I was in a bad way, but I knew the worst was over. The trip had already kicked in, and I did not need to absorb any more psilocybin from my mystical friends. Struggling to stand back up, all I could think about was how I was going to get back to my perfect viewing point to see Killing Joke before I missed another song. I was determined and focused, though I had no clue where I was, so I crawled about a bit, found my legs, and made my escape through an unmanned door. Looking back so as to get my bearings, I realised I had been inside the Samaritan's tent and made a mental note of its coordinates, should I require it again later, then followed the sound of Killing Joke till I was back near the performance area stage right. Squeezing through the mass of revellers, I found my way back through the crowd and to my pals by the barriers. The pushing and shoving was still immense, and I didn't feel as though I could tolerate it, so I flapped my arms around and caught the attention of a big guy who just 10 minutes earlier had saved my neck. With a look of desperation and innocence on my face, I told him I was really ill, but there was no way I could miss the gig, and asked if I could sit on his side of the barrier till the gig was over. To my utter joy and satisfaction, he gestured with his head for me to jump over and helped to pull me once again to the safety of the other side. I sat down awkwardly on a concrete slab which was holding the barrier in place. Feeling very lucky and almost spoilt, I looked back at my friends, stuck in the thick of monstrosity. The rain was teeming down, thick and heavy, but although cold, I felt amazing. Relieved of the nausea and pain I'd felt earlier, I was in a totally euphoric state. The kindly bouncer passed me one of the bibs that the staff were wearing and told me to put it on my head to keep me dry. I quickly slipped it on, realising it gave me access all areas. I had the best seat in the house and I was not about to give it up. Jazz appeared to be annoyed at the mix of the music and was gesturing most of the way through for things to be turned up or turned down, but to me it was perfect. An audio sensation which felt like an explosion in the centre of my brain, lighting parts in there I never knew existed. Brighter Than a Thousand Suns, the album, is greatly described in its title, and we listened to it for many years following. Its fresh, clean production was satisfying to the open ear, similar to the feel of early tracks like New Day or Me and You, with added intensity and substance, and each remix offered us another level to inspect within ourselves. However, despite how extreme my own feelings and awakenings from the album were at the time, I could not begin to review it here when it's already been dissected by an expert. So once again, let's hear it from Prindle. Brighter Than a Thousand Suns, 1986. Quote, "Even synthier than the last one, but let me say something here. This is not something that you would normally expect me to say. Benny's. Also, these songs are just wonderful, moody, soaring and sad, all with unexpectedly beautiful vocals. Thank you very much to a Coleman, no longer requiring himself to shout the chords out. It's a pity the last 3 songs aren't anywhere near as moving as the first 5. In fact, it's those last 3 songs that suck my numerical grade down to a 7. First 5 songs rule. Oh sure, they sound like Duran Duran, but open your soul, man, open your soul. Even though this would be a rotten first joke purchase for any young rocker, if you're already a fan, you should pick it up for sure. Jodi's guitar is still there, but it's buried way behind the lilting tones of mid-80s synth drums and keys. Oh man, that mid-80s synth sound. It'll never go out of style, question mark, question mark, question mark. End quote. I suffered all the following day, having lain awake till dawn on the height of the night's events and the paranoia which set in amidst those awake in our tent. Around 4 a.m, we had all noticed a large shadow moving around the midpoint of the abode's canvas walls. Round and round it went, making neither indentation on the cloth nor any sound. All was quiet outside, and with the only light inside our tent being a torch hanging from the central pole, we couldn't work out what sort of creature was blessing us with its presence, only that it was not of this world. After a good deal of speculation, I was the one to finally discover the simple explanation. A tiny bug had been circling the outer rim of the head of the torch, causing it to appear as if a sizable, weightless rabbit was running around the outside of the tent. The knowledge was comforting, and we were all finally able to sleep some. We in our infancy led down shining paths, shining paths, divine our disillusion, face our imperfections. I begin to wonder, onion peelings scattered, we've been crying. Open our eyes and tears run down. I open my eyes and tears run down. I look through your mind and tears run down. And under the skies and tears run down. Look at our condition. Stand on concrete dais. Lovers frail and naked, move like pawns on chessboards. I had no idea. I had no conception. Where have we all come from? Where are we all going? Open our eyes and tears run down. I open my eyes and tears run down. I look through your mind and tears run down. And under the skies and tears run down. All these changes we shall witness. I will try to understand. Share your grief and your confusion. Compassion in us cries. No divine intervention. only moves on black and white. Great schemes are also made of these. Open our eyes and tears run down. I open my eyes and tears run down. I look through your mind and tears run down. And under the skies and tears run down. Chessboards by Jazz Coleman, from Brighter Than a Thousand Suns by Killing Joke. Lack of sleep and hungover. The sound of Saxon blaring and thumping way into Saturday night drove me bananas. I lay there praying for the noise to stop, and I really wanted to go home at that point. Every so often, one of our buddies would pop back to the tent with tales of happening over in the concert field. Claire said Saxon were fantastic, but then she was tripping again, so they probably were. She offered to escort me back to the stage field with her, but I had not the slightest urge to be anywhere other than lay on my back, so I declined and wallowed in my misery till the torture was eventually over when the noise shut down. The following day, I was somewhat refreshed enough to bring myself to go back into the enclosure and experience Hawkwind, though still a little poorly. They were well worth the effort. At the back of the field, far from the hell of the sweat-chasing marauders, I managed to remain upright long enough to see Lemmy arrive on stage, riding a Harley-Davidson, and belt out hoarsely for a couple of songs before once again returning to the horizontal position. Lying down was in fact the perfect way to enjoy the fantastic laser light show which accompanied the mind-expanding sounds produced by that new age old rockers hippie-trippy movement. The after effects of the Friday mushroom trip meant my eyes still saw beyond the range of the norm, and I was back in a state of elation once more. I had always felt my place was not as a spectator being pushed and herded with the mass of musical followers, but with the performers, the musicians, the creators, and the time was right for me to find a better outlet for my own talents. Burton-on-Trent was the next stop for us to watch Killing Joke live that year. We travelled down by coach, which meant one stop for vehicle swap on the way. Soon after our arrival at the coach station for changeover in Derby, we realised it was rather an odd place. Unrealistically quiet and uninhabited, besides one bloke with Elvis tattooed across his forehead who stared at us as he walked past in a slow and awkward way like a zombie. Burton-on-Trent is a few miles further on from Derby, and we came to the decision that there must be something in the water in that area of the UK, as every person we encountered came across as noticeably devoid of both intellect and spirit. Arriving early as usual, we caught up with Pikey, who had ridden his Lambretta down from Manchester. The bike, which had been professionally sprayed with expensive metallic silver paint, with added metal flecks, advertised his own love of decent music and philosophy. The words, "Something Better Change," a track by the Stranglers, neatly painted on one side, yet still keeping in touch with his former days, on the soul side, decorated on the other. Pikey is a unique and very lovable character, whose interest in all things metaphysical meant he enjoyed sharing in experiments of all kinds, musical, mental, and otherwise entertaining. Ed found Pikey the perfect subject for, and subsequently drove him senseless with, tricks and practical jokes. As Pikey lived on a quiet street, Ed delighted in many pranks to disturb the peace, including repeatedly ordering taxis and pizzas to his door, just for a laugh. Ed's shenanigans worked best in the dark of late evening, and his favourite was tying cotton to glass bottles and placing them on the wall outside Pikey's house. The cotton was then attached to a privet bush on the opposite side of the road, and Ed and I, his keen assistant, would hang out to witness, in hysterics, each time a passer-by blindly tripped the invisible cord, causing the bottles to smash. Not only did it freak the innocent party involved, but it prompted the sweet old lady next door to come out to see what the commotion was. Being a sensible young man, Pikey was not overly keen on his parents receiving reports of foolery and nuisance while they were out. To pass the time before Burton, we spent a few hours looking around record shops in the town centre. Walking out of the shopping arcade into the cold tipped air and bright of the sun, Ed and I noticed a familiar face heading in our direction. Wearing a tweed overcoat and sticking out from the crowd like an Eskimo in Egypt, Jazz, who appeared to know we were in town to see his band, smiled at us, nodding and saying hello, before disappearing into the shopping arcade himself. We were quite uplifted that the guy had recognised us, though it could just have been that we stood out from the throng as much as he did. Later that afternoon, we met back up with Pikey in a small public house in a square not far from the gig venue. The locals seemed quite displeased with our company, and to add to the discomfort, a gang of football fans entered the establishment shortly after our arrival and proceeded to cover the paintings in the room with Union Jack flags. The mayhem they brought with them was unnerving, to say the least, and a bald and frighteningly brainless guy was shouting his toothless mouth off about some lads from Lancaster being in the area and they were going to get it. Fighting broke out between the gummy guy and what looked like other football fans. So as rapidly as possible, without provoking suspicion, we timid music fans from Manchester slid out through the side door. I have to say, such was my reaction to fear at that age, I might have stayed and got involved with the brawling. But Ed and Pikey had grown out of fist fighting. It was a pretty dangerous situation, so I couldn't blame them for wanting to steer clear. Outside, all hell had broken loose. There was fighting on every corner as the locals appeared to be jumping on every stranger they could find. Small town England, as Ed described it, seemed to be a place where 20th century civilizing evolution had forgotten to call. In the relative safety of the canal bank at the back of the venue, we tried to relax and toked on a few numbers. We caught sight of Jodi there crossing over a bridge, taking a stroll in the sunshine. Dressed in a brown suit, Jodi had the coolest walk we had ever seen, which the ever-observant Ed was quick to point out. It was a simple, yet heartwarming scenario for us to witness. We guessed Jodi must have been looking for fish. Once inside, we were feeling lucky to have escaped the brawling, as we noticed more than a couple of people looking bruised and scathed from the earlier antics of locals defending their territory. There was no hanging around after that gig was over. Although we undoubtedly enjoyed it, our minds were firmly fixed on getting the hell out of that town. And to continue from the song I recited the words to at the beginning of this chapter. Goodbye pervert, goodbye God. Goodbye muscle without a job. Goodbye lard, you would hurt me. You've got to go without your tea. Goodbye shit thief stealing from your own. I'll wave you off and I'll take your home. Goodbye alien you think I am. Die hard, die fast. Sink with Uncle CEC. Teen.